The Swabian War of 1499 in Germany and Engadiner Krieg, War of the Engadin, in Austria, was the last major armed conflict between the Old Swiss Confederacy and the House of Habsburg. What had begun as a local conflict over the control of the Valmuster and the Umbrail Pass in the Grisons soon got out of hand when both parties called upon their allies for help, the Habsburgs demanding the support of the Swabian League, and the federation of the three leagues of the Grisons turning to the Swiss Eidgenossenschaft. Hostilities quickly spread from the Grisons through the Rhine Valley to Lake Constance and even to the Sundgau in southern Alsace, the westernmost part of Habsburg, further Austria. Many battles were fought from January to July 1499, and in all but a few minor skirmishes, the experienced Swiss soldiers defeated the Swabian and Habsburg armies. After their victories in the Burgundian Wars, the Swiss had battle-tested troops and commanders. On the Swabian side, distrust between the knights and their foot soldiers, disagreements amongst the military leadership, and a general reluctance to fight a war that even the Swabian counts considered to be more in the interests of the powerful Habsburgs than in the interest of the Holy Roman Empire proved fatal handicaps. When his military high commander fell in the Battle of Dornach, where the Swiss won a final decisive victory, King Maximilian I had no choice but to agree to a peace treaty signed on September 22, 1499 in Basel. The treaty granted the Confederacy far-reaching independence from the Empire, although the Eidgenossenschaft officially remained a part of the Empire until the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The Peace of Basel exempted it from the imperial jurisdiction and imperial taxes and thus de facto acknowledged it as a separate political entity. Background: one source of conflict was the ancient distrust, rivalry, and hostility between the Old Swiss Confederacy and the House of Habsburg, which had risen to the throne of the Holy Roman Emperor since 1438. Since the late 13th century, the members of the Swiss Confederacy had gradually taken control of territories that once had belonged to the Habsburg realm. The Swiss had attained the status of imperial immediacy, being subject only to the emperor himself, and not to any intermediate princes or liege lords. This status granted them a far-reaching autonomy within the Holy Roman Empire, even more so as the emperor was a distant overlord. Before 1438, the empire and the emperor had been an antipole to the Habsburg dukes for the Swiss. Previous emperors had repeatedly supported the Confederates in their struggles against the Habsburgs, whom they saw as strong rivals. They had confirmed the imperial immediacy of the Swiss on several occasions, and the Swiss had succeeded in defending their privileged status against Habsburg dukes who had tried to regain their former territories. The Habsburgs in the Holy Roman Empire in the 15th century, when Frederick III of Habsburg ascended to the throne, the Swiss suddenly faced a new situation in which they could no longer count on support from the empire. Worse yet, conflicts with the Habsburg dukes threatened to become conflicts with the empire itself. Under Friedrich's reign, this did not occur yet. Frederick had sided in 1442 against the Confederacy in the Old Zurich War, where he had supported the city of Zurich, and he also refused to reconfirm the imperial immediacy of the members of the Confederacy. But Frederick's troubled reign did not leave room for military operations against the Swiss. In Austria, Frederick was in conflict first with his brother Albert and then faced the pressure of Matthias Corvinus, who even drove him from Vienna and forced Frederick's court to assume an itinerant lifestyle. In the Empire, Frederick faced the opposition of the Bavarian Wittelsbach dynasty and of his cousin Sigismund, who was Duke in Tyrol, Vorarlberg, and further Austria then. Sigismund had been in conflict with the Swiss Confederacy, too, when he had been banned by Pope Pius II in a conflict over the nomination of a bishop in Tyrol. The Swiss had next the formerly Habsburg territories of the Thurgau. In 1468, Sigismund clashed with the Swiss in the War of Waldstadt. which he could end without significant territorial losses only by paying a large ransom, which he financed by pawning territories in the Sundgau and the Alsace to Charles the Bold of Burgundy in 1469. Charles did not, however, help Sigismund against the Swiss, and so Sigismund bought back the territories in 1474 and concluded a peace treaty with the Confederacy, the Attribution, although the emperor never recognized it. In the following Burgundy Wars, the Swiss and Sigismund both fought against Charles the Bold. In 1487, Sigismund arranged the marriage of Frederick's daughter Kunigunda to Duke Albert IV of Bavaria against her father's will, and he also signed away some of his territories in Tyrol and further Austria to Albert IV. Frederick intervened by force. He founded the Swabian League in 1488, an alliance of the Swabian cities, the Swabian Knights of the League of St. George's Shield and the Counts of Württemberg and Tyrol and Vorarlberg. With their help, he forced the Wittelsbach House to return the territories signed over by Sigismund. In 1490, Sigismund was forced to abdicate and turn over all his territories to Frederick's son Maximilian I. Maximilian had married Mary of Burgundy in 1477 after the death of Charles the Bold in the Burgundy Wars and thus inherited the Burgundian territories, Duchy and County of Burgundy in the Netherlands. He took over and expanded the Burgundian administration with a more centralized style of government, which in 1482 caused the outbreak of a rebellion of the cities and counts, allied with Charles VIII of France, against Maximilian. The Duchy of Burgundy was also a French fiefdom and immediately claimed by Charles VIII. The first phase of this conflict would last until 1489, keeping Maximilian occupied in the Low Countries. He even fell into the hands of his enemies and was held prisoner for 4 months in Bruges in 1488. He was freed only when his father sent an army under the command of Duke Albert of Saxony to his rescue. Maximilian subsequently returned to Germany, leaving his cousin Albert as his representative. Albert would, in the following years, manage to assert the Habsburg hegemony in the Netherlands. Maximilian had been elected King of the Romans in 1486 on his father's initiative, and they had been ruling jointly since then. Upon the death of Frederick in 1493, Maximilian also took over his father's possessions and thus united the whole Habsburg territory in his hands. In the same year, the Peace of Senlis also marked the end of his wars against the French about his Burgundian possessions. He kept the territories in the Netherlands, and also the County of Burgundy, but had to cede the Duchy of Burgundy to the French king. Maximilian controlled thus territories that nearly encircled the Old Swiss Confederacy. Tyrol and Vorarlberg in the east, further Austria in the north, and the County of Burgundy in the west. Swabia and the Swiss, when asked by Emperor Frederick to also join the Swabian League, the Eidgenossen flatly refused. They saw no reason to join an alliance designed to further Habsburg interests, and they were wary of this new, relatively closely knit and powerful alliance that had arisen on their northern frontier. Furthermore, they resented the strong aristocratic element in the Swabian League, so different from their own organization, which had grown over the last 200 years, liberating themselves from precisely such an aristocratic rule. On the Swabian side, similar concerns existed. For the common people in Swabia, the independence and freedom of the Eidgenossen was a powerful and attractive role model. Many a baron in southern Swabia feared that his own subjects might revolt and seek adherence to the Swiss Confederacy. These fears were not entirely without foundation. The Swiss had begun to form alliances north of the Rhine River, concluding a first treaty with Schaffhausen in 1454 and then also treaties with cities as far away as Rottweil or Mulhouse. The city of Constance and its bishop were caught in the middle between these two blocks. They held possessions in Swabia, but the city also still exercised the high justice over the Thurgau, where the Swiss had assumed the low justice since the annexation in 1460. The foundation of the Swabian League prompted the Swiss city-states of Zurich and Bern to propose accepting Constance into the Swiss Confederacy. The negotiations failed, though, due to the opposition of the founding cantons of the Confederacy and Uri in particular. The split jurisdiction over the Thurgau was the cause of many quarrels between the city and the Confederacy. In 1495, one such disagreement was answered by a punitive expedition of soldiers of Uri, and the city had to pay the sum of 3,000 guilders to make them retreat, and cease their plundering. Finally, Constance joined the Swabian League as a full member on November 3, 1498. Although this did not yet definitively define the position of the city, during the Reformation, it would be allied again with Zurich and Bern, and only after the defeat of the Schmalkaldic League in 1548 its close connections to the Eidgenossenschaft would be finally severed. It was another factor contributing to the growing estrangement between the Swiss and the Swabians. The competition between Swiss and Swabian mercenaries, who both fought in armies throughout Europe, sometimes opposing each other on the battlefield, sometimes competing for contracts, intensified. Contemporary chronicles agree in their reports that the Swiss, who were considered the best soldiers in Europe at the time after their victories in the Burgundian Wars, were subject to many taunts and abuses by the Landsknechte. They were called Kuhschweizer, and ridiculed in other ways. Such insults were neither given nor taken lightly, and frequently led to bloodshed. Indeed, such incidents would contribute to prolong the Swabian War itself by triggering skirmishes and looting expeditions that the military commands of neither side had ever wanted or planned. The imperial reform of 1495, Maximilian I, like other Holy Roman emperors before and after him, had to face struggles with other powerful princes in the empire, and he thus sought to secure his position in the imperial monarchy by furthering centralization. At the imperial diet held in Worms in 1495, he was partly successful, but he also had to make concessions in favor of the princes. The imperial reform proclaimed an eternal public peace, to put an end to the abounding feuds and the anarchy of the robber barons, and it defined a new standing imperial army to enforce that peace, to which each imperial estate would have had to send troops. It also mandated the common penny, a new head tax to finance this army. Among the concessions Maximilian had to make was the institution of a new supreme court, the Reichskammergericht, thus separating the highest judicial authority from the person and the whereabouts of the emperor. He also had to agree to the formation of a governmental council of princes called the Reichsregiment. It would never play a significant role. It convened for the first time in 1500, but was dissolved by Maximilian 2 years later. The Swiss did not accept these resolutions of the imperial diet, and they explicitly refused to pay the common penny. They had no interest whatsoever in sending troops to serve in an army under Habsburg authority, nor in paying taxes, nor would they accept any foreign court's jurisdiction, and they had succeeded in securing public peace within their territories reasonably well by themselves. They simply considered the whole proposal a curtailing of their freedom. The Swiss were by far not the only members of the empire who refused to accept the resolutions, but Maximilian would use their refusal later as a pretext to place the Swiss Confederacy under an imperial ban.